Prepare yourself for a jaw-dropping story of love, betrayal, and shocking secrets that will leave you speechless. Just when you think you've heard it all, the twists keep coming. Don't miss out. Hit subscribe, smash that like button, and share this video with everyone who loves a good drama. Let's dive in. My wife betrayed me. We had been trying to have a child for 3 months, and when we finally did, I took a DNA test only to discover that Noah wasn't my son. Let me tell you about my marriage. My wife, Hannah, and I have been together for nearly 20 years. It's surprising to think that our 20th anniversary is just around the corner on November 5th. Reflecting on the past, I wouldn't change a single thing about our life together. Yes, we faced challenges, but making up afterwards always seemed to make everything better. That was how we managed. We hit a rough patch in our second year, but things smoothed out after that. We were young when we got married. I was 21 and Hannah was 19. We had grown up next to each other and known each other since childhood. It just felt right to get married, especially since my older brother Aaron had married Hannah's sister Claire the year before. Aaron and Claire had a baby within their first year of marriage, but Hannah and I had a harder time. We underwent various medical tests, even though doctors kept telling us to just relax and let things happen naturally. Hannah's mom, Martha, was persistent, always encouraging us to start a family. Martha really wanted a grandson, having raised only daughters. The test results were unclear. Hannah was fine, but I had a slightly low sperm count, though I never quite understood all the details. The doctors reassured us it wasn't a major issue and told us to be patient, promising that we'd have a baby when the time was right. Despite trying to stay patient, the pressure took a toll on our marriage. Thankfully, we didn't have to wait too long. 3 years into our marriage, just as the doctor had predicted, Hannah gave birth to our beautiful daughter Emma. Her arrival was a huge relief, and from then on, our marriage only got stronger. We settled into a comfortable routine, and soon, Hannah was pregnant again. This time, we had Alex, a son. The whole family was thrilled. It wasn't that we loved our daughter any less, but having a son brought a different kind of joy. I was the first in our family to have a son, and I proudly shared the news with my brother. He simply smiled and told me to give him some time. True to his word, the following year they also had a son. Then, 8 months later, Noah was born. It felt like waiting for a bus, nothing for a long time, and then suddenly, several come all at once. With 2 sons and a daughter, our home was always lively. Even when Hannah's sisters married, they joined our close-knit family circle. It was a great environment for the kids, and we always had support when we needed it. From what I could see, the other couples were just as content as Hannah and me, relishing the simple pleasures of family life. We faced challenges, like when Aaron suffered a workplace accident. I was by his side, donating my blood for his transfusion. He recovered, and I was fine too. We later joked about being true blood brothers. As our 20th anniversary neared, we planned a big celebration. Aaron and Claire had thrown a fantastic party for their anniversary the previous year, so we decided to do something similar. We booked a private room at a local hotel for a large family gathering. Then there was Emma, our beautiful 17-year-old daughter, who resembled a younger version of her mother. She had shiny dark brown hair and striking green eyes that often turned heads. She was slim, with long legs, features I tried not to dwell on too much as a father. Emma had a steady stream of boyfriends, and our house was frequently filled with them, but she was sensible, so we didn't worry too much. Alex, on the other hand, was built solidly, which suited him as he loved rugby, just like Aaron and I had at his age. At nearly 16, he was already a key player on his school's rugby team. Then there was Noah, the youngest. He sometimes struggled not being as athletic as Alex or as popular as Emma. Noah was having a tough time. He was probably the smartest of the 3 kids and did really well in school, but he was a typical complex teenager. That day, I could have been more understanding. Maybe I should have overlooked the mess he left on the dining table or even cleaned it up myself. But I chose not to. "You're not going anywhere until you clean up that mess, Noah," I told him firmly. "I'll do it later," he sulked in response. "No, you'll clean it now," I insisted. "Why are you always picking on me?" he shouted, losing his temper. "I'm not," I snapped back. "You're part of this family, and you need to follow the rules just like everyone else. Who's going to make me? Noah was on the verge of tears, his frustration peaking. I will, I retorted, losing patience. I'm your father and you will do as I say. My father, huh? He yelled. Are you sure about that? I was shocked, speechless. Sorry, Dad, Noah quickly said, his face showing pain. I didn't mean it. I'll clean up right now. He avoided my gaze and quickly cleared the table, collecting his things. Within minutes, the table was spotless, and he rushed out without another word, leaving me swirling in a storm of thoughts, my world seemingly on the brink of collapse. Noah had always been different from his siblings, more serious and scholarly, yet less sociable. I had often pondered this and discussed it with Hannah, but she would dismiss it, suggesting I was overthinking. But was I? What had driven Noah to say that? If he had just shouted in anger and left, I would have been upset, but it would have ended there. However, his quick apology and retraction puzzled me. Why? What did he know that I didn't? I couldn't shake the troubling thoughts swirling through my mind. Initially, I wanted to confront Hannah and demand answers, but what good would that do? How could I even begin to accuse her of infidelity? If she was innocent, such accusations could destroy her trust in me forever. And if she was guilty, she would likely just deny it. Furthermore, it had been over 16 years since we had started our family. Was it even relevant now? Anxiety churned in my stomach, leaving me nauseous and unsure if my suspicions were warranted. It had been a terrible day. Then, a new thought occurred to me. Blood types. Without wasting a moment, I rushed to our home office and retrieved the kids' medical records. Emma, Alex, and Noah all had O-positive blood, the same as mine. Relief washed over me momentarily, but it didn't last. Blood types alone don't tell the full story. The fact that they all had my blood type could simply be a coincidence and wasn't enough to confirm Noah's paternity. I needed something more concrete, a DNA test. I was surprised at myself for considering such a serious step based on one angry outburst. Maybe I was overreacting, but Noah's behavior during dinner that evening, his withdrawal from everyone, only added to my concerns. What's wrong with Noah? Hannah noticed too and asked. No idea, I shrugged, trying to seem unconcerned. Do you guys know anything? I queried Emma and Alex. They both shook their heads, clueless. Has he been upset about something? I prodded further, but again, no response. After the kids left the table, I finally mustered the courage to ask Hannah directly. Noah seems so different from the others. Do you know why? Let's not dwell on that, Ryan, she replied, moving to clear the dishes. He's just a bit more introspective than the others, that's all, she said. Was she dodging the question on purpose, or did she genuinely not see a reason for concern? I couldn't tell. Later that night, I found myself deep into researching DNA testing options online. An hour later, I was overwhelmed with information, but still no closer to a decision. It wasn't until Monday morning that I identified a lab capable of conducting the test. Arranging everything took nearly an hour, and I handled it myself to avoid explaining to my secretary why I needed a lab test. The service was available, but the cost was high, especially for expedited results. I needed answers before potentially jeopardizing my marriage. The lab advised me to send samples from all 3 kids, along with one of mine. Have you ever tried to collect a hair from your grown children? It's not easy. With Noah avoiding me, getting his was the most difficult. Nevertheless, I managed it. I sent off the samples and waited. Over the following week, Noah seemed to relax, likely glad I hadn't mentioned his outburst. We were almost at a point where I felt I could discuss it with him softly. However, I decided it was best to wait for the test results. Meanwhile, my wife continued as usual, and nothing in our daily lives changed. Our intimate life wasn't at its best, but I didn't reject her advances. Still, doubts tormented me, and even though I tried to conceal them from Hannah, I couldn't help but wonder during our moments together if there had been someone else over the past 2 decades. One evening, while having dinner with my brother and his wife, Aaron and I found a moment to ourselves. I nearly spilled all my concerns to him. We had always been similar in many ways, so if anyone else was Noah's father, it couldn't have been him. Why was I even entertaining such thoughts? In the end, I chose not to unload my worries onto him. Deeply, I believed he would stand by me if the DNA results were negative. I maintained my calm, so much so that Hannah noticed and asked me a couple of times if I was all right. I assured her, mentioning I was just preoccupied with some thoughts. She looked concerned for a moment but didn't probe further. Eventually, the results arrived. To ensure privacy, I had the results sent to my office, wary of Hannah possibly opening the letter first. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper, contemplating whether this document could signal the end of my marriage. Upon reading it, relief washed over me. Noah's DNA matched mine, though the medical terminology was confusing. The report used phrases like good match and close match, which suggested that my fears were unnecessary. I was moved to tears, grateful I hadn't burdened Hannah with my doubts. I decided to make it up to her by planning a special dinner that evening. As I looked over the cover letter again, I noticed a request from the lab to discuss the results further. Assuming they might be trying to get more money, I hesitated but chose to call anyway. "This is Ryan Johnson. Dr. Parker asked me to call," I said when the call connected. "Hello, Mr. Johnson," the voice on the other end replied. "Have you reviewed the results we sent?" "Yes," I answered confidently. "It seems my concerns about Noah were unfounded." "That's correct," he confirmed. "But there's a bit more complexity to discuss." My heart dropped. "Does this mean he's not my son?" I asked, anxiety creeping into my voice. "No, Mr. Johnson," he reassured me. "The likelihood he isn't your biological child is less than 1 in a million. I am certain he is your natural-born son. So, Noah is truly my son?" I sighed with relief. "Yes, Mr. Johnson, he is," the doctor affirmed. "Then what's the issue?" I asked, my voice tinged with a mix of relief and confusion. "The concern is with the other 2 samples you provided," the doctor said with a serious tone. "What about them?" My voice cracked as panic began to rise. "The samples from your son's brother and sister," he clarified. "It seems they are only half-siblings to your youngest son, Mr. Johnson." "Half-siblings?" I stammered, completely shocked. "What does that imply?" "It means," he continued, "that it is highly unlikely that you are their biological father." Suddenly, the phone slipped from my grasp, and before I knew it, I was on the floor, surrounded by concerned coworkers helping me to recover. "Give him some space!" someone yelled as I gasped for air, coming back to consciousness. "Are you okay, Ryan?" another coworker inquired. I nodded weakly, trying to stand, but they insisted I sit back down. They resumed discussing office matters, but my mind was stuck on the devastating news I had just received. Thankfully, someone arranged a ride home for me and advised me to take the rest of the day off. Arriving home to an empty house with Hannah still at work and the kids at school, I knew I had to act. With a heavy heart and trembling hands, I called the lab again. I soon found myself apologizing to the doctor for hanging up abruptly during our previous conversation. "No worries, Mr. Johnson," he responded kindly. "Let's review the results once more." He reiterated patiently, "Noah is definitely your son, but it is highly unlikely that Emma and Alex are your biological children." "But the results indicated good or close matches," I argued, seeking any possible error. "Could there be a mistake?" "Typically, if it were only 1 sample, we might consider retesting," he explained. "However, with 2 samples showing the same results, the likelihood of an error is extremely low. Emma and Alex are full siblings, but it is improbable that you are their father." "But you mentioned the matches were close," I insisted, clutching at straws. "What does that imply? Do you have a twin or a brother, Mr. Johnson?" the doctor inquired cautiously. "Or perhaps another close relative?" "My brother," I blurted out, as a sudden realization struck me. "What does my brother have to do with this?" "You'll need to draw your own conclusions, Mr. Johnson," the doctor continued, but I had already tuned out. My world seemed to be collapsing around me. What was my next step? Should I end my marriage? Confront my brother? Or should I keep this devastating secret and live a lie? The weight of the situation was unbearable. And then there was Noah. He sensed something was amiss, but he misunderstood the gravity of it. My view of my son would inevitably change, Yet my love for Emma and Alex wouldn't diminish. They were still my children, no matter their genetic makeup. But Hannah, that was where the heartache truly lay. How could she do this to me? And my brother, involved in this betrayal? And Claire, my sister-in-law, how would she react? How would this news affect the rest of the family? My mind was overrun with questions. Oh God, the burden was too heavy, and I wasn't prepared to confront it. I vaguely recall walking out the front door and aimlessly wandering down the street. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital bed with bandages on my arms. Apparently, I had stumbled into traffic while in a daze, though I remembered none of it. Ryan, are you all right? I painfully turned toward the voice and saw Hannah standing there. Not really. Not yet, I replied. She was still my wife, but the words failed me. How could I possibly say, "Hey, honey, I just found out 2 of our kids aren't mine and you've been cheating on me with my brother. How was your day? What's for dinner?" It all felt so absurd. Fortunately, my injuries were minor, and I was discharged the next day. Unable to do much on my own, I depended on Hannah for care. This gave me time to think and plan, yet it all seemed futile because I was still at a loss for what to do next. Now, my main focus was on Noah and his siblings. I knew that any decision I made had to prioritize their well-being, even if it meant setting aside my own feelings. Hannah's needs had to take a back seat. Our 20th wedding anniversary was approaching, and we had planned a big dinner since the room was already booked. I needed to resolve things before then. A week later, physically, I was back to normal, but mentally, I was still in disarray. Life seemed to resume its usual routine, but I was lost in thought about my next steps. Noah, on the other hand, appeared uneasy and tense. One evening, Hannah suggested, "You should talk to him, Ryan. I don't know what's troubling him. He doesn't seem to want to talk to me anymore." "I'll talk to him," I assured her. "Any idea what's bothering him?" she asked. "I have a few thoughts," I replied sharply. "Do you want to discuss them, Ryan?" she inquired. "Not really," I answered, surprising her. The next day, I found Noah alone in his room. There was no escaping this conversation. "Want to talk about what's bothering you?" I asked him softly. He shook his head, indicating he wasn't ready to open up. "Is it about the other day, Noah? About us?" I continued, noticing a newfound maturity in him that caught me off guard. "You don't understand, Dad," he responded. "I might know more than you think," I said, keeping my tone gentle but firm. "Then why don't you do something about it?" he pressed. "Why do you let them get away with it?" This conversation was not going the way I had anticipated. It seemed we were talking about something else entirely. "Get away with what, Noah?" I asked, genuinely confused. "You really don't know, Dad," he said again. "Apparently not," I conceded. "It's Mom and Uncle Peter, Dad," Noah whispered quietly. "When you're at work, once a month or so, it's really embarrassing," I muttered. "Uncle Peter?" Realizing he wasn't Hannah's brother, but married to one of her sisters. "Oh, that," I mumbled, struggling to find the right words. "They've been doing this for years, Dad," Noah revealed solemnly. "Emma thinks she's Peter's daughter, not yours." At this, Noah broke down in tears, and I wrapped my arms around him, trying to offer comfort. It had been a long time since I had held him like this, and I was struck by how much he had grown. "Noah," I assured him as I held him close, "you are my son in every way that matters, not Peter's." "How do you know, Dad?" he sobbed. "How can you be sure?" "I'm sure, son," I responded confidently. "Believe me, I'm sure." We continued to talk for a while, not going into deep details but enough to reassure him. I managed to convince Noah that he truly was my son, which seemed to lift a huge weight off his shoulders. However, I hadn't yet confronted the reality that my brother might be the father of Emma and Alex. The image of my perfect family was now shattered. Both Emma and Alex were aware of their mother's affair with their uncle, but had opted to ignore it, uncertain how to cope with the revelation. It put them in an incredibly difficult position. Peter, being the youngest of Hannah's sister's husbands and notably handsome, brought an added complexity to my already strained marriage. A few days later, I gathered all three children for lunch, bracing myself for one of the hardest discussions of my life. I disclosed everything I had discovered. The whole day, I was consumed with anxiety, worried about how they would react to the news. Surprisingly, the kids coped with the news fairly well. Emma let some tears fall, and Alex sat in silence, his head in his hands, visibly shaken. Despite their initial distress, they all wanted to confront their mother right away. I persuaded them to hold off, explaining that I needed to sort a few things out first. They reassured me of their love and loyalty and were prepared to sever ties with Hannah. I managed to calm them down, reminding them that despite her faults, she had always been a devoted mother. I spoke about her more kindly than I felt, especially after learning from the kids about her ongoing affair with her brother-in-law, Peter. Yet it seemed unlikely that Peter could be Noah's father, considering the timing. The claim of their monthly meetings might have been overstated, but the truth remained uncertain. One thing was clear. The kids felt a weight lifted off their shoulders by sharing what they knew. Tears were shed by all of us that night, including by Alex. Inside, I harbored a strong desire for revenge. I knew I had to be cautious with my plans for revenge, to avoid hurting my children further. Yes, I had to be strategic. I needed retribution not just for myself, but for my children as well. I considered several approaches, but couldn't settle on anything definitive. A direct confrontation seemed inevitable. Fortunately, an opportunity was just around the corner with an upcoming event on December 10th. Our family had planned a gathering as usual. With our parents gone, Aaron and I were now the patriarchs. That night, a group of 39 of us, mostly Hannah's family and a few mutual friends, sat down for a celebratory dinner. The food might have been delicious to others, but to me, it tasted like cardboard. Then it was time for the speeches. Here we go, I thought, feeling a mix of dread and resolve. Was this the culmination or merely the start of something new? I was anxious, sweating as I tried to calm myself. What I needed to do wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Welcome, everyone, I began, engaging in small talk before transitioning to talk about our 20 years of marriage with Hannah. However, I knew I had to share some very personal details next. The room filled with laughter as I cracked a few jokes about our romantic life, and Hannah blushed, thinking it was all light-hearted fun. Little did she know what was about to unfold. As the laughter faded, Emma suddenly stood up, followed swiftly by Alex and Noah. Without a word, they all walked out, leaving everyone at the table stunned. "Come back here, all three of you!" Hannah shouted, standing up. "Don't disrespect your father!" Only Alex turned back, giving a sorrowful shake of his head before catching up with his siblings. "Ryan, do something," Hannah urged, clearly desperate. "Tell them to come back right now." "It's all right, dear," I said calmly. "They know what I'm about to say, and since it concerns them, perhaps it's better they're not here." Hannah was visibly shocked by my response, first taken aback by my defiance, then filled with concern as she tried to decipher my motives. "Sit down, Hannah," I instructed firmly, not allowing any room for debate. "As I was saying," I resumed, surveying the room, "I've enjoyed 20 years of what I believe was a perfect marriage until recently." I paused, sensing the growing tension. Some guests appeared confused. Others continued smiling, assuming a joke was coming, but many looked uneasy. "Imagine my shock," I continued, "when I discovered that Emma, whom I cherish deeply, is not biologically my daughter." Hannah started sobbing uncontrollably, her face buried in her hands. "Would you care to tell everyone who Emma's real father is, Hannah?" I asked. She stayed silent, her sobs the only response. "Very well," I continued. "Does anyone wish to admit to being involved with my wife?" The room fell silent. I scanned the shocked faces of our family and friends with a sharp, accusatory gaze. Despite the grim nature of the situation, I felt a perverse satisfaction in laying bare the betrayal. They had no idea the extent of what I had uncovered. Giving my brother Aaron a pointed look, I saw him squirm uncomfortably, his guilt evident. "No one will confess?" I pressed. "Must I spell out the truth myself?" To my utter shock, Claire suddenly stood up. "It's not what you think, Ryan!" she cried out, clearly upset. It wasn't an affair. We only did it a few times to help Hannah get pregnant. The whole family wanted a boy, especially my mother, and it seemed unlikely you could father a child. If someone had dropped a feather at that moment, it would have knocked me over. Claire knew. She knew about her husband, my brother, being the father of my children. As I looked around the table, I saw the room split in two. Some faces were filled with shock, while others seemed unsurprised. There were friends who appeared clueless and family members who seemed to be in on the secret. As I stood there, trying to process everything, friends began to quietly leave, one by one, until only about 17 or 18 of us remained, all family. "Why don't you go play over there?" suggested Olivia, another of Hannah's sisters. Slowly, the younger children were sent away, but the teenagers stayed, glued to the scene, not wanting to miss the drama. "Well, it looks like you all knew what was going on, didn't you?" I said, looking around the room. "You've all been aware of this, except maybe the kids here." A couple of the husbands looked confused, but no one denied my accusation. "Ryan, it's not what you think," my brother started, trying to explain. He looked like he was going to say more, but the sheer anger on my face silenced him. "So, you all knew that Aaron slept with my wife and fathered Emma, didn't you?" I demanded, my voice rising as I looked around the table. No one openly admitted it, but no one denied it either. "I swear it was just 3 times, Ryan." Claire tried to defend herself, her voice getting louder. "And whose idea was this?" I shouted angrily, my frustration boiling over. Once again, no one spoke, but too many eyes shifted toward Martha, my mother-in-law. "I should have known," I muttered, realizing Martha's role in all of this. "Thanks a lot, Mom," I said to her, feeling the weight of it all. "Your desperation for a grandson has destroyed my marriage." "No," Hannah finally spoke up, her voice shaking. "Please, Ryan, don't say that. I can't imagine life without you. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive just one mistake?" "One mistake?" I repeated in disbelief. "Just one mistake?" "Yes, honey," Hannah pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "It was only that one time. It seems so foolish now, but back then, Mom's plan seemed to make sense." "And what about Alex?" I asked her, my tone firm. "He's yours, of course, Ryan," she assured me. "Wrong," I corrected her sternly. "I've had a DNA test done, and his father is the same as Emma's." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. "What are you saying, Ryan?" Claire exclaimed in shock. "You heard me, Claire," I confirmed, not backing down. "If my dear brother is Emma's father, then he's also Alex's father." Silence filled the room as everyone processed what I had just said. "You scoundrel!" Claire yelled at her husband, her voice trembling with anger. "You promised me this wouldn't happen again, and then you went and slept with her again." "I'm so sorry," Aaron mumbled, avoiding eye contact, clearly regretting his actions. "And you traitor!" Claire shouted at Hannah, her voice filled with rage. "I agreed to let you have my husband just that one time, and then you kept sleeping with him." With that, she took a few steps toward her sister and slapped Hannah hard across the face. "You deceitful hag!" she spat, hitting Hannah repeatedly until someone stepped in and pulled her away. Tears streamed down Claire's face as she was held back. "Are you happy now, Mom?" I demanded, glaring at Martha, but she just stood there without any expression. "Who else has been betraying me?" I challenged the room, my gaze locking onto Peter, who sat directly across from me. "You scoundrel!" Olivia suddenly screamed, shocking everyone with her outburst. "It's true, isn't it? You did sleep with her that night at the party." The room was thrown into confusion as Olivia turned to her husband, Daniel, who shamefully admitted to the accusation. "And you, my dear sister?" Olivia turned her anger toward Hannah. "Have you slept with all your brothers-in-law, you shameless woman?" "Well, she certainly had her fun with Peter over there," I added, feeling a twisted sense of satisfaction. Peter's weak attempts to deny the accusations only made things worse, and Olivia responded by punching him square in the nose. "Don't bother coming home tonight," she shouted at him. "In fact, don't ever come back." Isabella, filled with rage, turned on Aaron. "I'm divorcing you, and I never want to see you again." The three furious sisters linked arms and stormed out of the room. "You're no sister of ours," they shouted back at Hannah as they left. "Feeling pleased with yourself now, Martha?" I confronted my mother-in-law, but she remained emotionless, staring straight ahead while Hannah sobbed into her arms. Finally, my father-in-law, Mark, broke the silence. "I'm sorry, Ryan," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "If only I had known." His words trailed off, but he was the only one who even attempted an apology. Then my brother Aaron approached me, his hand outstretched, his face full of shame. "Ryan," he stammered. "Ryan, what can I say?" "Nothing, you scoundrel," I replied, though my words lacked real force. I swung at him, my fist catching him on the chin with little strength, but the timing was just right. He stumbled backward, tripped over a chair, and landed sprawled on the floor, making no effort to get up. That marked the end of the evening as the mood turned sour, draining all the joy from the night. Hannah didn't come home that night, and after grabbing a few belongings, she never returned. The kids were firm about not speaking to her for a while. Even though I harbored deep resentment toward her, I had to focus on the well-being of the kids. Over time, they softened and allowed her back into their lives, but things were never the same. I remained the dad, while she became more of a distant figure. Our family was shattered. Two of the sisters who stormed out that night filed for divorce, leaving only Olivia to stay with Aaron. However, she didn't make it easy for him, determined to give him a taste of his own medicine. A couple of nights later, Olivia showed up at my place when the kids were out, and it quickly became clear what she wanted. Whether it was out of revenge or a way to get back at Aaron, I never knew, but I got my payback. There was no love or tenderness, just a wild physical frenzy that lasted for hours. It felt strange, like being with my wife, yet completely different. Afterward, she thanked me and left. It wasn't until months later that I found out she had been doing the same with Aaron's friends. Whether their marriage would survive, I didn't know, and honestly, I didn't care, but I could imagine it being tough for my brother. About 3 weeks later, one of Hannah's other sisters, the attractive one, called me and asked me out to dinner. I agreed, and we went out, had a meal, chatted, flirted, kissed, and ended up in bed. However, this time felt different. After the initial rush, there was a deeper connection between us, and we made love in a way that reminded me of the early days with Hannah. I couldn't understand why Peter had strayed from his marriage, but it certainly wasn't due to a lack of closeness. Perhaps the most satisfying twist was when Martha's long-suffering husband, Mark, finally had enough of her meddling. He bought a 40-foot yacht and spent the rest of his days sailing around Europe. This worked out well for me and the kids, as we often joined him on sailing trips, exploring places like the south of France, Malta, and the Canary Islands, creating unforgettable memories. During one of these trips, Emma met a young Spaniard, and they eventually got married. He came from a family that owned one of Europe's largest boat marinas, which turned out to be quite beneficial. As for the boys, they're taking their time and not rushing into marriage, maybe learning from my experiences. They have plenty of time ahead of them. As for me, I don't have much contact with Hannah, but the kids keep me in the loop. Apparently, she's taking life one day at a time and often asks about me. I just nod and move on. When it comes to my own love life, I'm thinking about giving marriage another try, but this time, I'm being introspective. There's a mutual affection between us, but we're both being cautious. Only time will tell. I want to be sure that I'm not considering marriage just to spite Hannah, although I have to admit, the thought of her reaction if I did get married again does bring a smile to my face.